Even though I was only 5 years old, I can still recall that day as if it were yesterday. That was the day my life changed irrevocably. My name is Mia. Dad had left Mom and me alone in our suburban home to go on another business trip. The doorbell rang when I was in the living room playing with my dolls. When Mom realized who it was from, her face lit up and she hurried to respond. "Mia, sweetheart, please go to your room and play," she exclaimed, looking excited. I followed instructions, but my curiosity overcame me. Peering around the corner, I noticed a tall man that I didn't know. Mom was packing clothes into a suitcase at a pace I had never seen her do. Mom quickly packed her bag and made her way to the door. I emerged from my hiding spot, terrified and perplexed. "Where are you going, Mommy?" I inquired. With her eyes barely catching mine, she added, "I have to go away for a while, sweetie. Please be a good girl for Daddy." Without any farewell hug or kiss, she vanished abruptly, leaving behind only the sound of a car engine starting and then gradually fading into the distance. I waited for her to return while I stood there looking at the locked door. But she never did. The house felt more spacious and empty than it had ever felt. Night fell and my fear increased. I reached for the light switches, but my height prevented me from turning on the lights. I started crying as the darkness engulfed me. "Daddy! Mommy!" I called out repeatedly, but nobody answered. I have no idea how many days have gone by. I was dehydrated and starving, and it felt like there were monsters in the dark, just waiting to devour me. I sobbed till my eyes dried out, then cowered down in a corner, trembling in terror. I heard voices outside at last. Mrs. Johnson, our neighbor, was engaged in conversation. She was stating, "I've been hearing a child cry for days. I fear that something may have occurred." The door flew open, and all of a sudden my dad, the neighbors, and police officers were in the house. He said, "Mia," and gathered me into his arms. "I'm very sorry, Mia." "Oh my God." I sobbed with relief as I clutched to him. I caught sight of a policeman carrying a piece of paper over his shoulder. "Mr. Anderson, I believe you ought to read this," he stated solemnly. Dad carefully placed me down and picked up the note. His face creased as he read it. He appeared to have aged significantly in a matter of seconds. "It's gone," he muttered. "Linda has left. She departed from us. The following few weeks flew by. Dad came to be with me. He took time off work. We had a full house of visitors, including friends, family, and a kind woman Dad claimed to be a child psychologist. Dad was informed by the psychologist that Mia had experienced trauma. After what happened, it's normal for her to have some fears and anxieties. And my anxieties, oh my, were real. I needed a light to fall asleep. I was afraid of the dark, and I got anxious whenever my father had to go because I thought he wouldn't return either. The fear never quite left me. Rather, it became an integral part of who I was, much like my green eyes and brown hair. Mia Anderson is the girl who was abandoned by her mother, who is terrified of the dark, and who worries about being abandoned all the time. Life settled into a new normal as the days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months. Dad and I joined forces to manage this new world without Mom, becoming a team of two. I taught him how to make his coffee exactly the way he wanted it, and he learned how to braid my hair, badly at first, but better with practice. The day Dad met Helen was altered by that. Dad first introduced me to her when I was 7 years old. Helen instantly put me at ease with her warm smile and compassionate gaze. Helen became a regular in our lives throughout the course of the following few weeks. I couldn't say how much I valued the fact that she didn't try to take the place of my mother. Rather, she made a place for herself in our small family. I once overheard Dad on the phone with her. "Helen, I believe the time has come. Are you going to live with us?" After 1 week, Helen moved in. Instead of attempting to be my mother, She developed into a friend, which is equally as significant. She did a great job braiding my hair, assisted me with my homework, and always made sure my room had a nightlight. Our lives saw additional changes as the years went by. After Dad's business took off, we found ourselves in a posh neighborhood and a large new home. I have a private room with a view of the rear pool and a walk-in closet. Still, certain things remained the same. I continued to worry whenever Dad went on a business trip. I continued to sleep with a nightlight, and occasionally I would catch Dad gazing at old pictures of Mom late at night. My 10th birthday began just like any other. Pancakes greeted me when I got up, a particular birthday custom that Helen had for me. Dad had just got home from work, and we were having a little get-together later. Everything appeared to be flawless. The doorbell rang then. I froze as soon as I entered the living room. My mother was standing there, obviously older than she actually was. Beside her stood a small child, perhaps 5 years old, with a teddy bear in her hand and big eyes gazing around. Dad continued, his voice tense. "Linda, why are you in this place?" Mom inhaled deeply. "Tom, I truly apologize for everything. I understand I have no business being here," but she gave the young girl a gesture. "Emma is this person. She is your offspring." There was silence in the room. I experienced difficulty breathing. Dad's expression wavered between shock, rage, incredulity, and something else. "My daughter again?" he asked. Mom gave a nod. "When I departed, I was pregnant. I swear, I had no idea at the time. Tom, I'm very sorry for all of my errors. Emma deserves to know her father. I'm not pleading with you to pardon me for that." I observed as Dad lowered himself to the young girl's level. "Hello, Emma," he murmured. I'm your father." Emma timidly glanced up at him. "Hello," she muttered. Helen's pallid face caught my attention as she stood in the doorway while Dad spoke with Emma. She turned and hurriedly moved on. I felt stuck in place, even though I wanted to follow her. The following few hours were a blur, filled with heated voices, tears, and a lot of adult talks I wasn't allowed to hear. I hid in my room, trying to make sense of everything while I pressed my knees to my chest. Later that evening, Dad came to talk to me. "Mia," he said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "I know this is a lot to take in. Your mom, she's made some big mistakes. But Emma, she's innocent in all this. She's your sister. I've decided to give your mom another chance for Emma's sake." The next day, I watched from my window as Helen packed her car. She looked up and saw me watching with tears in her eyes. She waved goodbye. I waved back, feeling like a part of me was leaving with her. Mom and Emma moved in that same day. Emma took the guest room, and Mom took her old place in Dad's room. It felt wrong, like she was erasing the last 5 years as if they never happened. The years that followed were complicated. Mom was back, but it wasn't the happy family reunion I might have dreamed of when I was younger. She doted on Emma, showering her with attention and affection, but with me there was always a distance, an awkwardness that never quite went away. As for Emma, well, she was just a kid. She didn't ask to be born into this mess, and I tried not to resent her, but it was hard, especially when I saw how easily she fit into Mom and Dad's life in a way I never seemed to. By the time I turned 18, I was more than ready to leave for college. I had chosen to study zoology. Animals had always been easier for me to understand than people. They didn't judge, didn't have complicated emotions or messy family histories. They just were. The day I left for college was bittersweet. Dad hugged me tight, his eyes misty. "I'm so proud of you, Mia," he said. "You're going to do great things." Mom gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder. "Good luck," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Emma, now 13, rolled her eyes. "Finally get my own room," she muttered. I pretended not to hear her, focusing instead on Dad's warm embrace. College was freeing. For the first time, I was away from the tension at home, the constant reminder of my complicated family situation. I threw myself into my studies, finding solace in the world of animals and nature. But even as I excelled academically, I struggled socially. Years of feeling like an outsider in my own family had left their mark. I was quiet, reserved, always afraid of getting too close to people. What if they left, like Mom had? What if they replaced me, like Emma seemed to have done? Instead, I found comfort in the college's small zoo. I volunteered there in my spare time, caring for the animals. There was a particularly grumpy old llama named Larry who became my favorite. He didn't like most people, but he seemed to tolerate me. The years at college flew by, and before I knew it, I was graduating. As I stood in my cap and gown, diploma in hand, I scanned the crowd. Dad was there, beaming with pride. Mom and Emma were there too, clapping politely. "Congratulations, Mia," Mom said stiffly. "Your father and I have been talking, and well, we think it's time you started looking for your own place. You know, spread your wings." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I looked at Dad, hoping he'd contradict her, but he just looked away, his expression pained. "Right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, I'll start looking right away." The days following my graduation were tense. I was back in my childhood home, but it felt anything but welcoming. Dad tried his best to make me feel comfortable, but Mom and Emma made it clear that I was an unwanted guest. "Mia, have you started looking for jobs yet?" Mom would ask over breakfast, her tone falsely sweet. "You know, it's important to get your foot in the door early." Emma would chime in, "Yeah, and maybe you could find your own place too. It's getting kind of cramped around here." Nights were the hardest. I still needed my nightlight to sleep, a fact that didn't escape Emma's notice. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, she barged into my room. "Seriously?" she scoffed, pointing at my nightlight. "You're 22 and you still need that? No wonder you don't have any friends." I felt my cheeks burn with shame. "Leave me alone, Emma," I muttered. But Emma wasn't done. At dinner the next day, she brought it up again, this time in front of everyone. "Hey, Mom, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Don't you think Mia should see a therapist or something? I mean, she's an adult who's afraid of the dark and can't make friends. That's not normal, right?" I felt something snap inside me. Years of pent-up hurt and anger came flooding out. "You want to know why I'm like this, Emma?" I said, my voice shaking. "It's because when I was 5, my mother left me alone in a dark, empty house for days. Do you have any idea what that does to a child?" The table went silent. Dad looked down at his plate, his face a mask of guilt and pain. Mom's eyes widened in shock, then quickly filled with tears. "How dare you?" she cried, her voice rising dramatically. "How can you be so cruel and vindictive? I've tried so hard to make amends, to be a family again, and this is how you repay me." As Mom continued her tearful tirade and Emma smirked triumphantly, I realized something. I couldn't live here anymore. This wasn't my home, and these people, they weren't my family, not really. From that day on, I threw myself into job hunting with renewed vigor. Then, finally, a glimmer of hope. I had an interview scheduled at a small wildlife rehabilitation center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I left the house that morning feeling cautiously optimistic. But when I arrived, I found a hastily scribbled note on the door. "Interviews canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. We apologize for the inconvenience." Disappointed, I headed home earlier than expected. As I unlocked the front door, I heard voices coming from the living room. Mom and Emma were deep in conversation. I was about to announce my presence when I heard my name. "If Mia wasn't around at all," Emma was saying. "I mean, It's not fair that she gets any of Dad's money. She's not even really part of this family. I know, sweetie, Mom replied, her voice soothing. But we have to be patient. Once she moves out, it'll be easier to convince your father to change his will. We just need to keep pushing her to leave. I felt like I'd been doused in ice water. They wanted me gone, not just from the house, but from the family entirely. And they wanted my inheritance too. As I sat on my bed, my mind raced. What should I do? Should I tell Dad? But would he believe me over Mom and Emma? He'd forgiven Mom for abandoning us after all. Maybe he'd take their side. My first stroke of luck came when I saw a job posting for the city zoo. They needed a zoologist to assist with their wildlife rehabilitation program. It wasn't a glamorous position, but it was exactly what I'd been trained for. I sent in my application immediately, and to my surprise and delight, I got called in for an interview. The day of the interview, I stood in front of the zoo's main gate, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. The interview went better than I could have hoped. The head zoologist, Dr. Martinez, seemed impressed by my knowledge and passion. "You've got the job, Mia," she said with a warm smile. "Welcome to the team." I could have cried with relief. Finally, something was going right. Working at the zoo was everything I'd hoped for and more. I spent my days caring for injured wildlife, educating visitors about conservation, and even assisting with research projects. In the evenings, I'd return to my tiny apartment, which I was able to rent with the money I saved to combat the loneliness. I started participating in online forums for animal lovers and people with similar interests. That's where I met Jake. Jake was from the same city, shared my love for animals, and had a wicked sense of humor that made me laugh even on my toughest days. We started chatting regularly, sharing stories about our day, and discussing everything from the latest conservation efforts to our favorite books. One day, Jake suggested we exchange photos. With trembling hands, I sent him a recent picture of me at the zoo. He responded with a photo of himself. He had kind eyes and a warm smile that made my heart skip a beat. But as much as I enjoyed our chats, the idea of meeting in person or even admitting my growing feelings terrified me. What if he rejected me once he got to know the real me? What if he left just like Mom had? It was around this time that I started corresponding with Lily, a girl I met on a support forum for people with childhood trauma. She understood my fears in a way no one else had before. "You know what helps me?" Lily wrote one day. "I write emails to the people I can't talk to in real life. I pour out everything I'm feeling, all the things I wish I could say, but I don't send them. I just save them as drafts. It's really cathartic." Taking Lily's advice, I started writing emails to Dad. In them, I told him everything about overhearing Mom and Emma's conversation, about how I felt that he didn't seem to notice me anymore, and about how I felt like an outsider in my own family. I started writing to Jake, too. In these emails, I allowed myself to be vulnerable in a way I couldn't be in our chats. "Jake," I wrote, "I think I'm falling for you, but I'm scared. I'm scared of letting anyone get close to me. I'm scared of being hurt again." These emails, too, remained unsent, my feelings hidden away in the safety of my drafts folder. Dad called occasionally, his voice a mixture of concern and confusion. "Mia, honey," he'd say, "why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We miss you." Each time, I'd make up an excuse. "Sorry, Dad, I've got a big project at work." Or, "I'm not feeling well this week. Maybe next time." It was just another Saturday afternoon. I was at the mall picking up some essentials when I heard a familiar voice call my name. "Mia, is that you?" I turned around and there she was, Helen, my former stepmother. She looked older, but her kind eyes were just the same. Before I knew it, we were hugging, years of separation melting away in an instant. That's when I noticed the young boy standing beside her, looking up at us curiously. This is my nephew, Mike, Helen explained, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. I'm raising him now. My sister passed away last year. Over coffee, Helen filled me in on her life after she and Dad split up. She'd been on her own until her sister's death left Mike in her care. We started meeting regularly after that, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Mike. One day, Helen called and urgently asked to look after Mike. That evening, Mike arrived at my apartment, backpack in tow. As I prepared dinner in my tiny kitchen, I could hear him tapping away on my laptop in the living room. I told him he could play games if he finished his homework. When I came out of the kitchen with 2 plates of spaghetti, I found Mike looking guilty, his face pale. Mia, he said, his voice trembling. I did something bad. I was curious and I saw these emails in your drafts folder and I sent them. All of them. I'm so sorry. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Those emails, my private thoughts, my deepest feelings, were sent out into the world. To Dad, to Jake. I felt like I couldn't breathe. That night, after Mike left, I lay in bed, my mind racing. What would Dad think? And Jake, oh God, Jake. My phone pinged with a message notification. It was from Jake, but I couldn't bring myself to read it. What if he was disgusted by my feelings? What if he never wanted to speak to me again? I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Dad. Mia, he said, his voice serious. We need to talk. Can you meet me at the cafe near your old high school? My heart pounded as I sat across from Dad in the small cafe. He looked tired, his face etched with lines I hadn't noticed before. I got your emails, he said quietly. Mia, I had no idea you were feeling this way about your mother, about Emma, about everything. I couldn't meet his eyes, shame and fear warring inside me. Mia, look at me, Dad said, his voice gentle but firm. I looked up, surprised to see tears in his eyes. I love you more than anything in this world. I'm so sorry I made you feel like you weren't important to me. That was never, ever my intention. We had not spoken for years, but we conversed for hours on end. About Emma's arrival, about Mom, and about how I'd felt ignored and forgotten. Dad paid close attention, at times even wiping away a tear. At last, he got up. He commented, Mia, we're going to figure this out, but I need some time to process all of this. Me and you. I swear. I was relieved and afraid at the same time as I watched him leave. Now, what would happen? But before I could think much more about it, my phone rang once more. It was Jake. Mia, I got your email and I feel the same way, he continued, his voice heated. I truly do like you, but I've been too afraid to tell you so. Do you want to get together for coffee? My heart leaped for joy. I surprised myself by saying yes and maintaining a steady tone of voice. I would adore it. I met Jake at a little coffee shop the following day. In person, he was much more attractive, and his gentle grin instantly made me feel comfortable. We spent hours discussing our pasts, dreams, and concerns. I felt really seen and understood for the first time in a long time. One crisp morning as autumn leaves started to fall, my phone rang. Dad was there. Mia, he replied, his voice pleasant, but carrying an unidentifiable undertone. Please join us for Thanksgiving dinner. I find it significant that you are present. I agreed because of something in his tone. On Thanksgiving Day, my heart was racing as I stood on the porch of my childhood house. Jake had volunteered to accompany me as support, but I thought I should handle this alone. Mom smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes when she opened the door. Mia, thank you so much for coming along. Emma scarcely looked up from her phone as she relaxed on the couch. Oh, You arrived." Dad came out of the kitchen and gave me a big hug. He said, "I'm happy you're here, sweetheart." There was a noticeable tension as we ate dinner. Emma and Mom looked at each other, their grins forced and fake. Dad, though, looked strangely composed. Dad cleared his throat just as Mom started to plate the turkey. "We need to talk about something before we start." He extracted a big manila folder from behind his chair by reaching down. Dad started removing documents and placing them on the table. He added, "Linda, Emma, I've known for a while that something wasn't right, so I looked into it." A bank statement was held up by him. "First, I found out that regular withdrawals, quite sizable sums in fact, from our accounts were made without my consent." Emma instantly thought her dish was extremely intriguing, and Mom's face went pale. Dad went on, removing yet another document. "Linda, I hired a private investigator. He sent you photographic proof of the interactions you had at the Rosewood Hotel with a certain gentleman." Mom let out a gasp and reached for her mouth. "Tom, let me explain," said Dad. But he wasn't done yet. His hand trembling a little, he took out one last document. "And lastly, I underwent a DNA test. My biological daughter is not Emma." The space became quiet. Emma's phone tinkled and fell to the ground. Mom appeared as if she could pass out. Dad stated, his voice firm despite the passion in his eyes, "I've already spoken to my lawyer. I fear I will have to ask you and Emma to leave this house as I file for divorce, Linda." Mom spoke up, rage taking the place of amazement. "This is not something you can do. I'll accept you for everything that you possess." Dad's face became sterner. "You won't, Linda, in actuality. I'll countersue you and demand payback for all the money you've taken, including the costs I incurred in raising Emma, if you try to claim any property. I have a very good case, my lawyer tells me." Mom's cheeks started to well up with tears as the situation's truth set in. With her world collapsing around her, Emma sat in startled stillness. After a few days, Mom and Emma moved out. My father and I started to mend our relationship. And now it's stronger than ever. We started organizing a road trip as a father and daughter, had weekly dinners, and had lengthy conversations. Over coffee one day, Dad reluctantly mentioned Helen. He confessed, "I've been thinking a lot about the past and the mistakes I made." I apologized to Helen over email. We've been having coffee together and discussing various issues. Sincerely glad for him, I smiled. "That's fantastic, Dad. Helen is a very remarkable woman." From my end, everything was going more smoothly with Jake than I could have ever anticipated. He was kind, understanding, and patient with my fears and insecurities. I was even beginning to work through my problems in therapy with his help.